this video, I wanted to do something a little bit different and use some various textures to incorporate into the painting. There is a lot of trial and error in this video. It's something that I haven't done before, but I figured it would be fun just to try out and see how it goes. I figured it would be fitting to do a beach painting with some water washing over some sand. So just from doing different projects, I happen to have a lot of leftover supplies, and I wanted to do something just so I didn't feel like I was wasting them. There was a small amount of Mod Podge left. I had some sand left over from a previous project. I had this small bag of crystals that came with a craft kit that I never actually used, and they were just sitting around for a while. Even some of the paint that I used, they're almost empty containers. But at the end of the day, I just thought it would be fun. So starting out for the water, I will be using a variety of different blues, and I've added in a little tiny bit of green. Initially, it was a very pale mint green, and then you'll see that I do add a deeper green. A lot of times the seafoam colors do have a bit of green in them. So you'll see I'm adding a little bit of glitter. I don't want to use too much because I don't want it to take over the image. I just thought it would be neat to have a little bit of sparkle here and there, just enough to kind of catch the eye at the right angle. And here you can see it's a bit more green. is no pattern that I'm going for. When you look out at the ocean, it's not in any distinct pattern. You want it to appear free-flowing and, I guess, more whimsical. I'm just kind of mixing the colors around both on my paper plate palette and also directly on the board. Water has always been something that's a little bit more challenging for me to draw. I find that it can be a little difficult to make it convincing when done up close. Although I do enjoy the process. When you're trying to make it look realistic, it's important, I think, to not try to be so precise with it, but also not overwork any highlights or any of the texture marks. But I definitely would not say that I'm any expert at drawing or painting water. At least not up close. I do enjoy painting it in sceneries. I especially love adding the little sparkle highlights. Makes them like glistening over it. So you'll see that I am adding a little bit of water as I'm going along, and the reason is I want the saturation to be slightly less as it gets closer to where the water will meet the sand. Just because the water isn't as deep, so you want to be able to see a little bit of sand through it as it comes closer to the shoreline. In hindsight, I do wish that I had but this was the first time I've ever done a painting like this. So now that's something that I know for if I ever do this project again or one similar. Now I'm going to add just the tiniest bit of texture detail. Trying to keep this part somewhat directional, as if water was flowing back and forth. So my white paint is almost entirely empty, and you will see that I'm not being overly careful about avoiding any other color getting into the container, just because this is going to be the last time that I use this bottle of paint. So I'm not concerned about accidentally mixing anything else into it. And the same goes for the Mod Podge. It started to get clumpy and wouldn't really be ideal for most other projects. So now I'm going to start working on the sand area. Before I do that, however, I want to do just a little bit of a base coat. The board itself is a very sandy color. However, I want to try to camouflage those wood lines, the wood grain lines, if possible. So initially, this first coat, I didn't add a whole lot of white paint to it. So I did make a decision to add just a little bit more. Like I said, this was a lot of trial and error, and I didn't do too much planning in advance. I just figured I would see how it goes and have some fun with this one. So I'm also not worried about this area being especially smooth. Because when you do look at sand, even after the water has washed over it, it's not entirely one color. I'm noticing that in the video, it does look a lot more yellow. So this may be a little confusing. I had opened the sand container before doing the base coat, and when I edited the video, I decided to move it to a more relevant part. However, in not paying attention, I didn't realize initially that I had moved it to a place where there was no paint on the board yet. So, just pretend it had been painted, I guess. You can see that the Mod Podge has different clumps in there, so I may find some other use for it, but as far as using it as like a sealer or a top coat, this container is no longer good. I think it was perfect for this project though. So I mixed the sand, the paint, and the Mod Podge all together. And I'm actually going to paint directly with this mixture. One thing that I have learned from this is that it would be a good idea in future projects to allow this area to completely dry. As it dried, I think could still see a lot of those green lumps. So I probably would have given some time after doing this to do a second coat before moving on to the next step of doing the water and the foam over it. I do still like the way it looks, but if I were trying to step it up slightly, that would be something I it does still have a beach look to it. And sometimes I find that I will notice things that other people looking at it may not. I'm sure if you are someone that does art and does like to craft and do various projects, I always wonder if other people notice the same things that you do. The little imperfections. A lot of times I will lose track of time. I'm drawing or painting, and a lot of that time is lost to trying to perfect something that is something that I doubt anyone else would ever notice. But I notice it, and I find that when I find a flaw or something I'm not happy with in my art, it tends to become the focus of it for me. In all honesty, I have 2 pieces of my own work hanging in my home for that exact reason. And they are both in areas of my home where I don't see them on a regular basis. I just have a tendency to be very overly critical of my own work. And if it's hanging in front of me, I will nitpick it day in and day out. So in order to prevent that, I just choose to not have my artwork. So these are the crystals that I mentioned earlier. They're not real crystals, I'm pretty sure there's some sort of resin or something like that. But I wanted to have a few of them sprinkled into the sand. And the reason for that is the beach that I spent a lot of time at as a child, and now as a mother I bring my daughter to this beach. It has a ton of these small clear stones, pebbles, that we've just always called diamonds. I guess they're like sea glass, but we spend a lot of time sifting through the sand trying to find ones that are clear enough that you can see through them, and those are the ones that we call diamonds. I didn't want to use the actual diamonds in the painting, but I thought that these little crystal bead things were a pretty good representation of them. So now I am going to start mixing everything up to do the highlights in the water and the foam. For this, I'm using white paint, more Mod Podge, some sand, and white glitter. And then at the end I will add in some of those crystals or clear beads. I'm not sure what to call them exactly. So I want these highlights to be very, very free flowing. When you look down into the water, you see all different shapes and movement lines, and I think to make it slightly more realistic, I'm trying to avoid having any lines that are too straight, or even highlights that I feel are too long. I want everything to be a little bit more sporadic. I will do a little bit of layering with this. I just really want to avoid overdoing it. I am watering down some of this as I'm going as well. And the reason is I don't want it to be perfectly white. highlighting at the end. But my main goal is to just lighten up some areas. To give it that watery look. Because of all the different things I have in this mixture, I did think it was really neat that if you work from the top of the mixture, it's more fluid, and if you wanted it to be a little bit thicker and more textured, you just simply dip the brush a little bit deeper into the mixture. And then if you take the brush down to the very bottom of it, that's where it's very thick, and that's what I'll be doing that seafoam look with. I wanted this to have a splotchy look to it, which is why I'm tapping the brush like this. Especially down where the water meets the sand. I wanted to make sure that you could see some areas of sand in this seafoam area as well. When you are at the beach and the wave rolls in and you look down, that seafoam isn't the color of the ocean. It's white, and if you look closely, it's actually the sand that you see coming through. I'm making sure that the foamy part, or in this case, the lowest part of the white mixture, is going to be the thickest part, and that's how I'm going to try and achieve that clean look. So here I'm sprinkling in some of those crystals that aren't crystals, and a little bit more sand. And because the sand is mixed in with white paint, it doesn't show as that sandy color all the way through. You do see it in little bits and pieces, but I liked that actually gave it a more realistic look. But primarily the paint does kind of take over and make it look white in appearance. So even the tools that I'm using, the brushes, they were definitely cheaper brushes. I wouldn't recommend using any good brushes for this project. If you did give this a try. Even though I was able to wash most of the sand out of brushes, I can't imagine it would be good for them. But these are brushes that I use for things other than doing actual paintings. The one I've used to do clear coat over a puzzle. I just use them for a number of things, but none of the brushes that I use for this video would be used for doing anything like a portrait or anything of that sort. So I did wind up having to lay this down. My mixture got very watery and runny, and I didn't want it to run down the length of the sand. You can see I just dripped some onto there, but I'll be able to work that into the sand. This is definitely a messier project. There's a big drip. So how I fixed this was I went back to the sand mixture and just blended it in that way. And I have to say, I actually am glad it happened, because I feel like as the water moves out back into the sea, the sand closest to the water is slightly darker just from being soaked. So, as Bob Ross would say, it's a happy little accident, and it worked out for the best. For this, I'm actually dipping the brush a little bit further down to get more of that textured mixture, because to get the foam look, the more sand and crystals, the better. What I really love about using these crystals is that when it dried, some of them dried without paint on them, and they actually wound up looking like little air bubbles, just like you would actually see at the beach. So I was very glad that I used them for this project. I do have some seashells lying around, and I thought it might be neat to glue one or two down at the bottom there on the sand. I don't necessarily think that it needs it, but it might be a nice little accent. But I'm still undecided on whether or not I want to do that. This is actually going to be used as the backboard for the inside of a cabinet. So I think if I did decide to use the shell, I would have to do some measurement to make sure that it wouldn't impede on any of the shells. So this is where I'm adding the water highlights, but again I'm keeping them very light, and I'm trying to just loosely follow the lighter areas that I painted earlier on. At this point, I'm just kind of scooping out what's in the bottom of this cup here. I love that it has a bubbly look to it. That is exactly what I was going for, so I like how it worked out. I haven't been to the beach yet this summer, which is a bit of a bummer, but I'm hoping to make a trip down in the next week or so. And I think just because I haven't been there yet, I needed a little bit of beach in my life. hope that you have enjoyed this video. And like always, I would love to know if you have done something like this before or wind up even giving this project a try. It's been a really fun summer painting. And it's definitely making me look forward to being at the beach on the sand sometime in the near future. And I hope this is able to add a little bit of relaxation to your summer. Thank you for watching.